This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. How's everybody doing today? Junk silver. It refers to older circulation coins like dimes, quarters, half dollars, and dollars from back before our government debased our money by removing the silver from our coinage. Many of these older coins are not only a solid investment, but they're ideal. Welcome to Mondays where I screw up ad reads for trade or barter if the economy ever truly went that far sideways. I don't know about you. I think the barter economy, I don't know if we ever get there, but I sure do understand and appreciate the sleep at night, like I went and bought some coins. I did. Because I'm like, if it ever gets there, at least I got some. And Silver Gold Bull, well, they're my go-to. And they have a feature on Junk Silver right now, exclusively for all you listeners. So I figure if I've done it, it's a safe little hedge if we ever get there. Lord willing, we never go there. But in our world, who knows? Everything changes so rapidly. So if you're interested, text or email Grahame in the show notes for details on this feature or any other question you may have around buying, selling, storing, or using your retirement accounts to invest in precious metals. And, we're off to the races on a Monday. Shaun's already butchered one. All right. Bow Valley Credit Union. Bow Valley Credit Union, your Alberta-regulated, fully serviced financial institution, is proud to present the first in Canada gold collateral lending. Now you can lend, against your physical gold and silver for your favorable rates. I can't even read today. I'm just what are my eyes not working? It's not even my tongue today. It's my eyes. Now all of you can lend against your physical gold and silver for favorable rates. It's like a HELOC on your gold and silver. Don't have any physical gold or silver? We can help you get a loan to purchase your gold and silver today. That is Silver Gold Bull. I don't know if you noticed, but gold is a booming. And if you want to get in contact with them, email Leanna at welcome@bowvalleycu.com. Tell them I sent you. For all your other needs or any ideas around Bow Valley, you want to see what they are, bowvalleycu.com. And you can get an e-metals account started today. Prophet River, did you see they got another gun grab this past Friday? So, I don't know what we're waiting for. But certainly, you should probably reach out to Joel. He's the primary contact for all you lovely listeners. They've created an email address, snp@profitriver.com, and I put that down in the show notes, so you just got to go down there. Ask Joel about anything, okay? This guy is sharp. He's going to help you navigate this ever-crazy world of the Liberals just trying to take away every gun under the sun. And for any of the listeners that make a purchase, you're entered into a $100 gift card draw every month. Doesn't matter. You can enter as many times as you want. You can purchase 10 different times, get 10 different entries. And it's not like you got to spend $1,000 or something. You can spend $5 and be entered. So that's pretty cool. Just head on over to profitriver.com. You can obviously make these purchases in store and reference me, or you can make it online. You can reach out to Joel. And just remember, no matter where you're at in Canada, they are the major retailer of firearms, optics, and accessories, serving all of you wonderful people. Carly Kloss and the team over at Windsor Plywood here in Lloydminster, they are the builders of the podcast studio table. And when it comes to wood, whether we're talking mantles, decks, windows, doors, sheds, man, can I just say the +3 outside? I'm like, deck season is getting close. You're looking at your deck, you're like, oh, maybe I should, we've been talking about doing a couple things. Well, when it comes to wood, stop in and see Carly here in Lloydminster, Windsor Plywood. Tell them I sent you. And, get some quality wood today. Cornerstone Forum 2025, heading to Calgary at the Windsport May 10th. All the details down the show notes. You click on it. We got a hotel, okay? This is big. If you're coming, make sure you get in on the blocked rooms before they are gone. You have until March 20th, and I would suggest that you get on that. We got a full lineup. Once again, go click on the show notes there, and you can find out everything you need to know. I'm hoping I'm going to see all of you lovely listeners there. And if you're in need, you're had a couple listeners reach out to me. This is how cool you all are. If any of you are struggling, like, man, I would love to be there. I just can't afford the $200 ticket. There may be some ways to help you out. So shoot me a text if you're like, don't feel bad. We get it. It's tough times, and it looks only to be getting worse with all the tariffs coming into play and everything else. And some of the listeners want to help a few of you find folks out. So if that's you, text me and we'll see what we can do. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, X, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. And with that all being said, let's get on to that tale of the tape. The first is the founder of the Alberta Free Lobbyist Group for Small Businesses in Alberta. The second is the chairman of the Economic Education Association of Alberta and a key organizer of the Freedom Talk conferences. The third, a lawyer who has spent 20 years in international business. He's the author of Battle for the Soul of Canada and leader of the United Party of Canada. I'm talking about Ben Trudeau, Danny Hozack, and Grant Abraham. So buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman podcast. Today I'm joined by, well, this is going to be an interesting go. Danny Hozack, Benoit Trudeau, and Grant Abraham. So we're talking a whole lot to do with what's been going on in Canadian politics. I don't know, the Alberta... Actually, I don't even know how to frame this. It started out last week, or a week and a half ago, folks, by the time this airs, with David Parker, Michael Wagner, and Tanner Naday coming on. And since then, there's been a whole lot go on. And I wish you could have heard we were having coffee before this, and it was a fascinating discussion. And we'll see where we get to today. But I look around this table, and I see a lot of men who've been staring at a problem or maybe some of the issues Canada's had for some time. And yet I'm the guy that's gets to facilitate it. I think what a wild ride. Everybody knows this in this room. I started out not here, and here we sit today. So with that all being said, gents, thanks for making your way here. I appreciate you being in the studio today.
Thank you for having us.
Now, before we start, because once we get going, I don't think I'm going to be able to interject with this. One of the things that... One of the things you get for coming in the studio is 1 ounce silver coin from Silver Gold Bull right here in Alberta. So it's kind of like the tip of the cap, you know. It's of coming all the way to Lloydminster, 150 miles east. What did you say of West Edmonton Mall?
150 miles east of West Edmonton Mall.
There you go. So this should be interesting. Now, do we just want to start with thoughts on Canada today, or do we want to start with Ben and maybe a little more history? Where do you boys want to start this chat?
Want to start history there?
It's funny.
As long as the history doesn't take 150 years.
It's funny. The audience. I'm waiting.
Just start in the 1750s. I like that.
Yeah.
No, I want to start from the start. No,
it's funny, to the audience. I just had these guys around the kitchen table, couldn't get any of them to shut up. And then I come in here and there's a mic and they're all like, well, I don't know. Where do you want to start? What do you want to do? Oh, okay. Well, all right.
Yeah.
Ben, let's start with a little bit of history and then we'll get into some of the stuff that's flying around the table today.
Yeah. Well, and I believe this story is important because in Quebec there was 2 attempts of separation in 1980 and 1995, but all that originated way before that. I mean, Canada, the way it is right now, when the English came in on September 13, 1759, on plain of Abraham, this country was French for 225 years. So this country actually had been French longer than English. And when you look at the French situation after the English came in, there was the Paris Treaty of 1763. Now I will go on the constitutional side, how we end up in the mess we're at. But basically, the September 13, 1759 was after 7 years of war. It was the last battle that got it. 1763, the King of France signed with the King of England an agreement to give Canada away, or the French territory in Canada. Canada, by the way, came from it's now Quebec City, and Canada was given by Jacques Cartier in 1534. So the first French guy that came here was 1534.
Was it called Canada?
He called it Canada because that's how he understood it from the Indians, the way they were pronouncing it. In French, the closest way was Canada when he went to that first village, which is now Quebec City, and when you look after that at what the French have done on this continent, from the time they started Quebec City in 1608, Montreal in 1642, and from Montreal spur a bunch of explorers that founded Chicago, that founded Louisiana, that founded so So all the other side of the Appalachian was all French along the Mississippi River, leading to 1763, where finally the English officially take over. And at that time, the USA were get rid of the English at the same time. So the King of England made a deal with the Americans. In fact, it wasn't a deal, but basically what the king did, he offered to the Americans that want to be remain loyal to him, to move north. So, and he started giving land in Quebec that was French for 225 years. So it's like if you have some military coming on your land now and say, no, like I know you're the seventh generation on this land, but now it's not yours anymore because we have Americans here that want to remain faithful to us and get out. That created a lot of trouble, leading to 1837. Well, in fact, 1791, where England decided to create two legislative assembly, one in Quebec for Upper Canada, and one in what is now Ontario, in Upper Canada. I don't know. I always confuse the both, and from 1791 to 1832. We ran with two legislative assembly that were absolutely independent. The problem, the French Legislative Assembly, is that 80% of it was populated by English people, and like a French judge was paid half of what an English judge would be paid. A French MLA was paying didn't have the same stuff than the English MLA. So there was kind of a revolt basically when London started giving some land in 1833, where they gave 847,000 acres to the British American Land Company, and that totally like exploded the French community, and they started basically what they started doing. They started invading house of judges and all that at night, and forcing them to resign, and that led to a little guerrilla from 1837, 1838. Which then created the Patriots in Quebec. And now, in fact, in 2002 in Quebec, Victoria Day, or the birthday of the Queen, is not Victoria Day, it's Patriot Day. So Quebec is very attached to their history, their root history. So fast forward, 1861 to 1865, Civil American War. Right after that, they're trying to solve the problem they have with the French. They hung 26 French leaders, sent 50 to Australia to calm down the spirits there, and then there's a long history from there. Like in late 1900, in 1899, 99% of all the wealth of Canada was concentrated within 1 square mile in Montreal. And the shop owner would build house of $1 million, which is equivalent to $40 million today, in that square mile. Meanwhile, on the other side of the street, there are French workers. The average age was 19 years old. The life expectancy in these shop run by the French. So again, a lot of resentment built up. If you were French early century, you couldn't get any loan, which then created the first credit union in Quebec, which is now the largest credit union in the world, Desjardins, which has 7.5 million members out of 8 million population. And I'm putting everything in context because you see that it's a very tight-knit society. And as you progress in history, leading to independence, during the war, 1917, there was a conscription that was a big revolt because when you were French, you had to go fight for the king, but you couldn't speak French once you were enrolled. So everything was in English. So 94% of the population was French speaking only. So you were plucked from your farm, from your place at 19 years old, put in a battalion to go at war, and it was forbidden to speak French. And then because once they landed though in France and all that, because you were speaking French, they would send you first. So when you look at battalion of during the First and Second World War, 80 to 90% of all the French that went to battle died on the battlefield, compared to 30% of the English.
If I may.
Yeah.
Does this not give you guys, and I mean you guys as in Quebecers, a lot in common with First Nations? like in the treatment and how like they were forced into different spots and not allowed to do. Like and the reason I bring this up is, you know, so much of our society wants to break off into like, well, we got reparations for this and can't we just see that we've been getting screwed over by government for a really long time, all these different groups. And one of the things about the convoy that always stuck out to me was the fleur-de-lis rolling in the first night and being happy to see Quebec and like everybody coming together, and that's got to scare the living crap out of our government. Yeah, you can carry on. I find it interesting. You know, like I hear all that, and all I ever hear out west is what we've done to the First Nations and how we have to make amends for that. And I listen to Quebec, and I'm like, holy crap, this is, you know, it almost rhymes. You know, it's almost the similar story. Obviously, just to a different culture.
Yeah, no, I agree that's half correct, because Quebec always had way more volume. Like in the early 1900s, you know, there was 75,000 in Upper Canada. 1836, there was 75,000 in Lower Canada for 500,000 French. No, so they were way more numerous. So the English couldn't just shut them up. No, they had to work with them. And then if you go after the war, the Second World War. It's called in Quebec the Dark Era. So there's a premier that was there, Maurice Duplessis, and that was the birth of real sovereignty in Quebec. He's the one that brought the Quebec flag, that got rid of the Union Jack and every English representation, and brought back French, like the flag of Quebec represent French royalty, with the fleur de lis. I don't know the flower representative of that was the son of the King of France. No, so. And then Duplessis decided to put on the map certain Quebec families, because the English were controlling everything. And that led in the early 60s with Jean Lesage. And Jean Lesage decided to start a movement saying, Maître chez nous, master in our own land. Parallel to that, Pierre Trudeau, started a political publication in 1950 named Cité Libre. And Cité Libre was super influential in Quebec. It was a think tank, a bit of type of writing, I believe, that here in Alberta we spoke about in Ted Byfield would do. No, so Cité Libre was on that level, and it's funny because at Cité Libre, a journalist that was working for Trudeau, because he didn't have to work. So his dad started gas station in 1900, sold everything for $1 million in 1905, and his grandpa had the largest legal office in Montreal that was dealing with all these rich guys within the Golden Square Mile. So Pierre Trudeau was raised in a lot of wealth, and so he had that luxury of starting a publication, paying for it, and all that. And René Lévesque worked for him, and there's other guys that work for him. So the most of the people that changed Quebec and that led to sovereignty, or to the referendum, worked for Trudeau. so Trudeau was always playing both sides. And what he's done with Cité Libre, he built up a very, very sturdy plan on how to basically destroy Canada at the end, how to bring Marxists in Canada and stuff like that. And he had two colleagues, Lalonde and Marchand. And when they were elected in 1968, they were calling Quebec the Three Doves. They were like the saviors, you know, like these three guys would. And both guys ran as MP, expecting for one of the three to be elected. Well, all three were elected, and then Trudeau went for leadership and won the leadership, and then he just applied like his plan to lead Canada towards what his son is finishing right now as a post. Trudeau always had that world view. Good friend with Castro. It was known it was to Castro. In fact, in 1968 he was elected. The PQ started in 1969. The 1970 election, the PQ was about to win in Quebec, and then Trudeau built up a scam. He aligned 10 Brinks trucks at his bank's friend, which now is now TD, it's the Canada Trust, and they rolled 10 armored vehicle out of Montreal to Toronto, saying that it was an exodus of funds, and because of that, the PQ lost at that election through that maneuver of disinformation. Meanwhile, you had his Valliere was one of his editors at Cité Libre.
You get going too fast. Okay. I want to just make sure maybe everybody in the room, I got two guys sitting here nodding their head. And oh, yeah, mm-hmm. You're saying that Pierre Elliott Trudeau lined up 10 Brinks trucks.
Yeah.
And said they were out of money?
No, said that. He said, you see, because of the sovereignty of Quebec, money is leaving.
And hauling the money out.
They're hauling the money
They're hauling the money out because Quebec wants to separate. And that was 6 days before the vote. And then it scared everybody. And nobody voted for the PQ because they didn't want the money to go out.
This is the I find that story as interesting as anything you've said, because I go, they know no bounds on what they can do to win an election, to change the public's narrative. And you think they can't do it, but you're just telling me a story on how they did it.
Yes.
So when you bring it, if I may, to the conversation of today, and I don't mean to jump over anything, and if there's things we need to go back on, we certainly can. And you look at what's happening right now with Carney, and you look at what's happening now with all of our leaders and the tariffs coming in, and Trump is the bad guy, and we're all going to align with Liberals, and we're going to be Team Canada, and we're going to fight this. You can see how they can construct a narrative that would get most everyday Canadians on board. Absolutely. I guess is what I'm trying to spit out.
Sorry. That was in April 70. Then in October of 70, the FLQ kidnapped James Cross, who was the English consul, commerce consul in Montreal. And 2 days later, they kidnapped Pierre Laporte, who was the Minister of Labor. But Pierre Laporte was the money bag, and he was the leader of that. I was talking to you a bit earlier. In Quebec, there's always these occult, like these 5-6 guys that control. Well, Pierre Laporte was the leader of that group that was managing all the money for the Liberal Party.
If anyone's listening, he did say it right. The Quebec government has the occult as part of its
political parties.
Parties.
Yeah. So anyway, Pierre Laporte was kidnapped, and the guys that kidnapped it, there was 4 guys, including Valliere. Valliere was the main editor of Cité Libre, so he was very, very close, very, very good friend of Trudeau, and they forced the French CBC to read a manifest to bring freedom to Quebec, and when Pierre Laporte was found dead, Trudeau decided to call the war measure in Montreal, and so in October, October 15. You see, they kidnapped on October 5, October 15. There was a student protest where the army was sent. October 17, the war measure were called, and that same night, 473 people were arrested, and he kept the war measure on until December. And so when he called the war measure, there's more soldiers of the Canadian Army that entered Montreal than on D-Day. He sent 14,000 soldiers in Montreal. It was 12,000 on D-Day. And he posted tanks on the street corners. It was forbidden to walk more than 3 together. So even family of 5, they needed the mom needed to walk behind the husband, or they wouldn't let 3 person walk together. They arrested 473, but they busted 6,000 doors that night. So at 4 a.m., entering, getting the guys out of their bed naked, putting them in for 72 hours without any reason. Artists, poets, anybody that would have wrote against the Trudeau regime was arrested. My dad at the time was doing his master in sociology at Montreal University, and he was the editor of the Montreal University newspaper. And the next morning he showed up at his office, and there was soldier waiting for him, and they ransacked his office. They empty all the files, the filing cabinets, every paper. They totally removed everything from his possession because his writing was deemed subversive. No? So
what would the Shaun Newman podcast be at right now in Canada? Would I be getting ransacked?
Yes, definitely.
Grahame, you're nodding your head over there, and what are your thoughts? I don't know. What do you warp to right now, or do you hear something there you think is important that?
Well,
the audience hears?
I think this conversation is interesting because where it's going to is a discussion about a referendum.
That's correct.
And I think this is relevant for Alberta now because Alberta sovereignty is the conversation right now in the country. For me, I see Alberta as Helm's Deep for Canada in terms of starting with this province and the preservation of our culture, values, traditions in the province and in Western Canada. And whether it goes further than that's another day's conversation. But I think, for me, this conversation is very interesting because I'm kind of politely waiting for the window to ask Ben or our other friend, and remind me of your name. It's
Danny.
Danny, forgive me.
No problem.
Danny, how many billions of dollars we've sent to Central Canada since 1960? And I think we're pushing
630 billion.
Yeah, so I mean, let's say we're on the second half towards $1 trillion.
Actually, that's net. We've actually we sent 50 billion a year.
Right.
630 billion we get nothing back for.
So and then you talk about equalization payments, and you talk about the issue of electoral reform and the need to recognize that most elections doesn't matter what happens after Winnipeg. And then you start to capture the sentiment right now in Canada of where Western Canadians are, and Albertans in particular. And I think in a lot of ways this is really the pulse right now in the country, and certainly in this province. We've got Trump challenging Canada to actually clean up human issues, value issues, issues in relation to things that we would all wish to see cleaned up in our nation, fentanyl and human trafficking. And then we've observed a very strange response in this country. Why would the good people in government ever wish to not do that? And yet we've seen a response that is a tariff response from the Liberals. And surprisingly, or in my view, unsurprisingly, we've seen the same response from the federal Conservative Party. And then now just this week, we're seeing the same response here from Alberta in terms of Premier Smith, and bless her, supporting Justin Trudeau in relation to these tariffs. And for me, it's very interesting this last 48 hours in Alberta, because it feels like the comfort blanket that has been the Alberta Conservative kind of framework with Danielle Smith has been pulled off, and people are feeling very uneasy now in relation to where we're at in this province in particular, and it's spawned discussions that are heading south. And I think for me, that is the discussion for our province, and how do we engage that? Is a referendum the solution? And I think that's part of the framing of this conversation. And I'd be interested to hear, what that referendum looked like in '95, and whether it was actually binding in law, and what that would mean for us now if we did run a referendum. And I think that's what a lot of Albertans are thinking about in terms of our own sovereignty. And, do we separate from Canada? Will we be allowed to separate from Canada? And is the solution in America, or is it the rebirthing of a new Canada that starts in Alberta, which is certainly my perspective.
Yeah. Well, where I'm leading with all that is that, we went through a referendum in 1980 with all that history behind, and quite fresh. In 1980, it was 10 years before that the army was in the streets of Montreal. And despite that, the referendum went through. Plus, there was Superstar promoting it. There was everything was leading to a success. And despite that, the result in AD was a 40.44 for the yes and 59.56 for the no.
And do you remember? Do you have what the question was?
I have it on my computer. But basically, the question was, do you give the mandate to go negotiate a new deal with Ottawa? Because René Lévesque René Lévesque never really wanted total separation, despite what was told West. Okay, René Lévesque, he was talking about sovereignty associations. So what he wanted is a sovereign Quebec with very tight link with the feds, and then we would tell the feds what to do. And this is how the Quebec government, from Jean à Jean, lead everything. So the first thing you want to do when you want to separate, you have to take back control of your finance. So in 62, he created la Société Générale de Financement, the General Society of Financing, was basically a slush fund for the politician. So in Quebec, there's that society. Now it's called Investissement Quebec, Quebec Investment. And basically, this is what you use for political matter. Everybody knows it. So it's a slush fund of 10 billion that the politician can invest in companies and stuff like that. No, so it's okay. Everybody knows it, and it brings money to the province. But then in 65, he created la Caisse de dépôt. So Canada created the CPP, and Quebec created Caisse de dépôt. And when you look, both were created at the same time because Quebec didn't want to join the pension plan. And when the Caisse de dépôt was created in 1965, when you look today, the Caisse de dépôt is worth 473 billion in asset versus the CP at 700 billion. So with 22% of the population, they have 3 times more performance than the CPP, the Caisse de dépôt. And the good thing with the Caisse de dépôt is that they are concerned on Quebec. Let's invest in Quebec first. Like we're speaking of a high-speed train between Edmonton and Calgary. Well, in Montreal, when they redid the Champlain Bridge, which is like the biggest arterial bridge in Canada, I think. They put a train on the bridge, and the train was paid by the Caisse de dépôt.
Did you say the 729 billion? That was in that's what in the Canada pension. What was the number in Canada pension?
So right now the Canada pension plan investment fund is 699.6 billion.
699.
Yeah,
okay.
and the Quebec Caisse de dépôt is 473 billion.
Yeah,
and most of the Caisse de dépôt, like here in Alberta, Cross Island Mill in Calgary is owned by the Quebec pension plan. South Edmonton Common is the Quebec pension plan. That they invest in Canada primarily, no? So and primarily in Quebec and then in Canada. And then la Société Générale de Financement, with their slush fund, what they do, they protect Quebec interests. Like in 1999, Videotron, which was our cable network distributor, made a deal with Rogers, and the premier came out that day, say he blocked the transaction. And he picked up Québécois, a Quebec company, and said, "I'm fine. We're financing you. You buy it. We won't let our infrastructure be owned by Ontarian." So this is so again. You go back in that context. Quebec has its own language, its own TV shows. No, in Quebec, when like my mom lives with us right now. No, until I'm building her house. She's building a house in next spring. So in the interim, she lives with us. And mom, she wakes up in the morning, listen to Quebec news, Quebec show, Quebec movie, Quebec everything. That and still as today, 77% of the population in Quebec speaks only French. They don't speak a word of English. So then you have a society that's entirely like its own language. Like they don't even translate TV shows; they redo them. Like CSI, there's the Quebec version of CSI. They don't translate the American TV show. They buy the right, hire Quebec actors and film it back in Quebec. So all the Quebec culture, all the Quebec media is built like that, no? So and then you have shows that have like on Sunday night 2.6 million people looking at them. This is why Jack Layton won in Quebec with the NDP, because Layton understood that, and he was at every Sunday night. He was at that show on French CBC. Because he knows that a third of the population is listening to that show every Sunday night, and so in Quebec, what I'm saying is that despite all these tools and the situation, the referendum failed twice. So a referendum is a very complex process, and I believe that it would be nice for Alberta to do the referendum, but the mechanics in it, and to get there. I'm not a big believer in it, to be frank with you. I don't believe that we will be able, in our context, to. We cannot get our own pension plan right now. No, and even on the freedom side, I hear people say, "Oh, I don't trust the provincial to." So you trust more the federal than the provincial to manage their money, and there's that culture in Alberta where it seems like to be at the federal level is almost a promotion that needs to be broken.
So then, if you, the guy who helped with the referendum in the 90s,
yes,
is like, I don't think a referendum is the right answer. In the first roundtable we had, I think it was pretty clear, 51st state, where all of Canada is a 51st state is a terrible idea.
It is.
Okay? So then everybody goes to the next thing, referendum. And the guy that helped with a referendum saying, I think that, with all the things Quebec has, it's probably a poor idea and it probably doesn't happen the way you want it to. You're not going to get 73% of Albertans to come out and go rah, rah, rah. So then where does that leave us?
Well, one place it leaves us is not needing 73%.
Yes.
Like I was listening to your visit with Michael Wagner and Tanner and
David Parker.
And I mean and you asked him about, did you have a copy of the question? Like the question in '95 took about 3 minutes to read it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But everybody knew if you vote yes, you're leaving, and if you vote no, you're not. You know what I mean? So everybody understood the question, but it was almost incomprehensible in writing. You know what I mean? And so the furthest thing we had then was a clear question. But I mean, everybody knew what it meant. And so it all worked, and we all understood what the rule was. And the rule was 50% plus one were leaving.
Yes.
And, not to get to cut in on you or anything, but to me, Michael the other day said, well, it has to be like a clear question and a clear majority. Well, a clear majority in democracies is 50% plus one. Like, it's not 60% or 66% or whatever. I looked at some of we've been ruled since you asked, like, what do we send to Quebec, or what do we send to the rest of Canada? We've sent them $630 billion. We send about $50 billion a year, but $20 billion just stays there that they don't even account for. We send 50. The last time I looked at it, we send $50 billion a year. $10 billion we get back in transfer payments. $20 billion they provide us in services, and $20 billion just stays there. So over the last 30 years, it's about $630 billion. If you look at it, in 1935, the Liberals formed the government with 44.8% of the vote. In 58 and in 1984, the Conservatives actually won with 53% and 50% of the vote. In 93, the Liberals won with 41%. The Liberals won again in 2015 with 49%. They actually didn't win in 2021. They had 32.6 and the Conservatives had 33.7, but they made a deal with the New Democrats to continue to run the government. So we've been sending like $50 billion a year. You talk about with a clear majority. No, we've been sending like $50 billion a year to a government to spread around the rest of the country that only had somewhere between 32 and 41% support. So I think when it comes time to leave, 50% plus one will be that's a clear 50% plus one is a clear majority. That's maybe that's a little different topic, and maybe I'm getting ahead of that point.
I don't think you're getting ahead. You mentioned it, Grant. Are they going to let us leave? When I look at the rules, it's not like you get 51% and you're out. Oh, then it's like, well, is the government going to let you leave, right?
Well,
and I know it'll spur on a whole new set of conversations, but like.
Well, I mean, this is the conversation in Canada right now, because it's easy to say, and I'm going to say it, we have a parliamentary system that clearly isn't working for Canadians. We have a judiciary that, let's say, surprises us a lot, to be polite. We have a two-tier policing system in this country. And the question, let's say 5 years ago, was, are we happy in the West while we were tolerating, let's say, the system because everyone was doing okay? But basically, we've now seen that we have a broken system. The challenge now is that there are two other things that really are still not in the kind of conscious conception of Canadians' minds. They're not at the forefront of Canadian minds. And one of them is that the Liberal Party and the NDP are telling Canadians that we will be the first post-nation state. And that means that the country stops being really having any sovereign connection between its people and its polity, or its people and its government. It's ruled by someone else, somewhere else. It's the construct of the United Nations, the WEF, the WHO, and we're really just become serfs on land that help make the country work. And that is not the vision of Canada. It never has been, and it's certainly not what our forefathers have fought for in this country. So that's a reality that Canadians have to start to get their minds around. The second reality, and I suppose there's three, just to adjust my comment. The second reality is that significantly changes our understanding of what is actually going on in the country, and we don't actually start to see and understand why things are happening the way they are until we see it through that post-national pair of glasses. It's like you have to put on a pair of glasses and say, why are these strange things happening? Why did COVID happen the way that it did? Why aren't we talking about foreign interference, even though the country's rife with it? Why aren't we engaging this issue of post-nationalism in terms of a public discussion? That's the lowest hanging fruit politically to talk about, because it's the betrayal of a people. And yet these are the reasons why these things are happening. And now what's happening actually in Canada is we have the very high priest of post-nationalism coming in and basically being slotted into our principal premier prime minister's seat to conclude the deal on post-nationalism, which is to migrate Canada into this state. And if anybody needs, from my perspective anyways, I mean, this is a discussion for us here today. If anybody needs to have a discussion about what's really going on, is look at what President Trump is asking us, which is the third force here, the third force in my comments. And he's basically saying, fix these inhuman issues. We don't want people dying. We don't want Americans. I mean, they say it's only 0.5% of the drugs are coming in from Canada. But if you listen to Sam Cooper's research recently, I mean, we're talking about fentanyl labs, Vancouver and Toronto being the epicenter for the money distribution for organized crime in Canada with regard to the drug trade. And we're talking about fentanyl labs up the BC coast, on inlets of the BC coast, that are producing massive amounts. And we're talking about them being shipped out of Vancouver Harbor, not in suitcases or smuggled in ladies' makeup bags. They're being shipped out in 20 and 40-foot containers. That's what Trump's really talking about. And that's why he's saying to us, to the nation, you're really not taking me seriously on this fentanyl discussion. So you would think that as, high-minded and good Canadian people, we would be wanting to stop the death cult in the country and stop seeing our children trafficked for whatever horrible reasons that they get trafficked. But what does our government say? No, we're gonna have retaliatory tariffs because we won't actually deal with organized crime in the country, I wasn't surprised to hear the Liberals and the NDP say that. But when Poilievre came out and said that there's going to be retaliatory tariffs, I started to say, well, there's another little indicator of a globalist response, because any globalist response is designed to make the Canadians weaker, poorer, and less powerful. And that's what a trade war is going to do with our country. And that's why whatever our leaders are doing in this country right now is asinine and stupid. And yes, we need to stand up for Canada. I get that. I love Canada. In fact, I bleed for this country. But this is not the response. The response is to actually fix these issues and tell Trump that we're going to fix these issues, and let him have a liaison person into our whatever our teams are that are going to be deployed in this country to go and clean up those labs, identify them as terrorist organizations, and if we need to, release a shoot to kill order in terms of lethal force to destroy this counterproductive and worse destructive force in our nation. So that's what he's talking about. And he's talking about it probably deeper. And if my conversations with Americans and any intelligence communities that I would talk to in my journeys, they're basically saying we're concerned about foreign migrants that could be armed, that could actually create a beachhead in Canada for the foreign troops that we think are in Canada, the Chinese, to actually destabilize our northern border. But our politicians aren't talking about this. You'll never hear this on the news, but this is reality in Canada, and this is why this conversation is so important, because what Trump is really saying to Canada right now is, you will never be a post-nation state. You will be Americans unless you get your house in order. And that is the discussion that we need to be having in Canada. What do we do to actually fix this? And for me, I said that in my earlier comment, Alberta is helms deep for the fixing of this country, and we need to take care of Alberta because it's the anchor point for this nation. It will allow us to fix Western Canada, and then if the rest of it at some point gets sorted out, it can engage and join under the terms that are set from the West. That's my view. But we've got to look at what Trump's really saying here. We've got to understand what post-nationalism means. Trump has been talking for years now about the deep state. He's been talking about globalism, and this is the war, and this is a war of good and evil. This just isn't political ideology. This is good and evil. And I know what side I'm on, and the battle lines are being drawn, and we need to fight for it. And I'm seeking a peaceful solution politically in this country, and we need to look at that. But our way of life, our culture, value, and traditions as Canadians are going to be defined and defended in Alberta.
And again, I believe referendum can be the way, just like it's not as easy as we might know, as people might think. The big change in there is the Trump factor. Is that, and in '95, in fact, when we did the campaign, what we've done before the campaign, we've done some alliances with. So there's the French president Giscard d'Estaing. He was president in the late '70s of France, and he always loved Quebec. So he moved to Quebec after his presidency, and lived in Montreal. I believe he still lived there. Maybe he's dead now. I mean, I don't know. But he was a professor at Montreal University. And Giscard d'Estaing in '95 put us in contact with high authority in France. And we had a deal that if we had that 51%, France would be the first country to recognize Quebec's sovereignty. If ever the feds would go WACO. And then we have that deal with him, and we had that deal with the UN Comité de la Francophonie. So as well, you have to understand that the United Nations is bilingual. It's French and English. These are the two official language of the United Nations. So we do had a lot of support from the UN and other organization, and a lot of people that we could organize stuff. But I believe the first thing, and lastly in '95 as well, there was all these. There've been referendum in 5-6 ex-USSR countries that all became independent one after the other, 91, 92, 93, 94. So we had a lot of models on which we could work on, very fresh models on how to build up a constitution and how to actually become sovereign and has the new country recognized.
Okay. Alberta. I think we're all, sitting in this room are like, Alberta's going to have to be part of the solution to get us out of the predicament we're in.
Yeah.
I think,
yes.
right?
Absolutely.
So if you watch, and maybe I'm missing a couple things here and you guys can fill in the blanks, but if you watch Danielle Smith's action to date, she went and tried talking to Donald Trump when nobody else would, right? And she got harassed by the East and applauded by the West. And then she took him serious and sent, created the buffer zone on the border and the sheriffs and everything. And so she took what Donald Trump was saying very seriously. I would argue. I think we can all agree on that. Am I? And then Donald Trump didn't go, Alberta, I see what you're doing. You're great. And this is awesome. He went, Canada, you're not doing enough. And now it's pushed Danielle Smith, I assume, I'm just reading the tea leaves, to be like, hey, we're doing our part, but if you're going to harass all of Canada, then we have to align with Canada. Am I making that too general?
No, I think you've summarized it pretty well, and I wish I could articulate the situation we're in as well as Grant just did. You know what I mean? Because this isn't, like so many people I think are listening to this thinking we're talking politics. I think you're absolutely right when you said this is good versus evil. And Jordan Peterson spoke in Calgary a couple of weeks ago, and he said Trudeau is basically I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said Trudeau is an incompetent globalist puppet. You know what I mean? But he said Carney is so much more evil than that. He's actually a globalist leader. You know what I mean? He's leading us down this road of evil. You know what I mean? None of which is good for us. And I agree with you what you said about Danielle went to meet with Trump. She had a good visit with him. But somehow in the last 48 hours, all of a sudden she wants to be on Team Canada. I don't know if they started handing out, bigger coins than you're handing out, Shaun, or what's going on here. But I mean, these people that she's now on Team Canada with have spent the last 30 years trying to proudly talking about shutting down our industry,
Yes.
putting an end to our oil sands, which the do-gooders always call our oil sands the tar sands. And for quite frankly, for about 2 million years, they were the tar sands till some young entrepreneurs from, all across Canada went to Fort McMurray with, I say, their old half-tons and their young wives, and they figured out how to take tar out of sand. And now it's one of the miracles of the modern world. And I think right now, Alberta is sitting on a third of the world's energy resources, and she's wants to be on Team Canada, who wants to shut down our energy industry. Like, I'm gobsmacked is the only word I can think of. It's an old-fashioned word, but I'm gobsmacked at how did she get from meeting with Trump, talking about trying to make things work out, to all of a sudden siding with Team Canada. Like, and if I'm not mistaken, like, we sell somewhere, I don't know the numbers, but 60 or 70% of what we export, maybe more, goes to America.
Yes.
I mean, we all know the devastation that happened to our beef industry when the BSE came along. Like, I mean, cows that were worth $500 were selling for $10 because we couldn't get across the border. So, like, I mean, like, pick a fight with Trump at your own peril. Like, if he just said, that's it, okay, if you want to be like that, we're just closing the border for everything. Like, it would be economic devastation for us. So I like Trump. In fact, I love Trump. I think quite frankly, I think he might be sent from God to help us get out of this, mess. And I like his idea of, I don't want to be a 51st state, but he has certainly, as you pointed out, Grant, he has certainly brought the conversation to the forefront. You know what I mean? And so now we're having the conversation, and I think it's a wonderful conversation. Personally, I don't want to be I wouldn't mind being a 51st state, but I don't want to be in a 51st state with the rest of the country. I want Alberta to be its own country, and then if we find that we think we'd be better off being a state, that'll be a second discussion after we decide to be our own country. But personally, I don't like. Why would you want to be a 51st state when you could be in the G20 anyway? Like, we could be a G10 or a G12 country. Yeah. Why would you want to be a state? We'd be like Alberta, especially a state in with Canada, the whole country, and it'd be like being a farmer in in California. It'd be, you'd be having to farm with your hands tied behind your back. So anyway, I just love the fact that we're having the discussion, and I guess Donald Trump has sort of brought it to the forefront and brought it to
one
reality.
of the things that's certainly different, I think, about than the 90s, and maybe once again, I'm younger than all of the men sitting in this room, so you can change, you can certainly poke holes in this as well, is the ability to have conversations like this and be kind of like open about everything, right? Maybe that's always been there. It doesn't feel like it. And then certainly, Elon Musk taking over Twitter. You can love or hate Elon Musk. He took they just go look at the Twitter files and realize he took something and turned it back around so that you can have this open discussion and things can start to flow. So this next 4 years, well, it's not even that anymore. It's less than 4 years, with Trump down there and Elon Musk. I go back to what Parker said on the first one, right? It's all the things are starting to line in this perfect storm. If Carney gets in, this conversation goes supersonic. But the only thing is with supersonic is I'm like, so if referendum isn't the way, what is the way? Is there a way?
Well, I believe in the right context, the referendum is the way. But you need a crisis. You need a crisis strong enough. Like for instance,
like Carney getting in,
like Carney getting in, like Trump keeping on, doing contact with some of us and with a lot of us, his team, to prepare kind of a transition, to push like again, if Trump, if the United States is the first country, the night of a referendum to acknowledge the independence of Alberta, it's a done deal. Nobody will go against what he says. Not even the Feds. I mean, negotiation totally turn on its head. No, and I believe that what I always reproach in Alberta is that we have the curse of our blessing, is that we're making so much money that as long as I have my 1-ton Denali truck and can go with my trailer at Starbucks, and
nobody makes big changes in a position of comfort.
Exactly. So I believe what's happening right now. Somehow, I'm not saying that I'm praying for that, but somehow I'm saying that if it gets very, very, very tough, that could be the right trigger to launch a referendum. But then we need somebody in front of the parade to do that, because a referendum is won on emotions and not on fact. So two things that make a referendum that makes them.
That is a sad statement.
Well, it's true. Yeah,
it's true. But the other thing, when Pat said, "I've only known you a few hours and I like you already," but when he said that the referendum isn't the answer, like there's a process. But I mean, there's two ways to get a separate country. One, like in this case with the Clarity Act, it's a vote, or it's get your guns and sort it out. And so I think the referendum is the answer. Like it's the rule of law. The Clarity Act has been put there to give people, the country, provinces that want to leave. It's given us a process by which we can get out. All you're saying is we have to go through the process. You have to bring the people together. You have to educate them. You have to explain to them why they'd be better off if they left or whatever. Some people want to make the case they'll be better off if they stay. You know what I mean? But nevertheless, I think we should all agree that if we're going to have like either a separate country as Alberta, or if we're going to have a 51st state, and I think Donald Trump would agree with this too. He doesn't want to send the military up here to have a 51st state. He would like us to negotiate how we get that. But he's also, as you mentioned, with all the fentanyl and everything, he's saying, okay, you people are going to have to start acting like adults and get your act together, or I will do something other than just lecture you about this. And so I think he's doing us a favor by sort of forcing the issue and saying, okay, it's time for everybody to man up, so to speak. Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, and I mean, if I'm not mistaken, did I not hear Premier Smith say, was it yesterday, that she has no interest in advancing a 51st state discussion? Is that not what the soundbite was in the news?
Well, she's not the one who's on the wheel in that context. I mean,
no, but but she's taking a position in terms of Alberta to say there's really no appetite for that in Alberta, which is to me not what I'm hearing. I'm sure it's not what you gentlemen are hearing either.
Well, I mean, just take a look at Jeff Rath. Jeff Rath puts Rachel Parker puts out
yes.
What is it? I don't like. She's done an interview with him now.
Yeah.
But the soundbite is like
the 3 seconds.
Right. It's quick and it explodes. And now he's talking about leading a delegation down in the States.
Yeah.
And people can have their thoughts on that. But I think as an Albertan, I'm just like, I just want to know, I just want to hear the conversation. Is there anything there? Or is it just...
There's something there. Like Jeff Rath was on Fox News this morning. And when you're on Fox News talking about what Alberta's doing, it's there. Like, I mean, Danielle must have been spending too much time talking to her friends, her newfound friends in the East. But I mean, the fact of the matter, the issue is on the table. You know what I mean? And we need to deal with it. And I say we want to have a respectful, adult conversation among all these different views and say, okay, what are the pros and cons of each of these different options? What could go right? What could go wrong? Let's talk about it. What can we do to make most of the people benefit? And when you look at Donald Trump, mostly he's a deal maker. But I would say most of his deals, he gets a 55-45 sort of a split. It's like most deals. He's a pretty good negotiator, so he gets a little bit the best of the deal. But at the end of the day, you don't see many people that have been that unhappy with the deal they made with him.
I agree.
And so I'd be happy to sit down with him and make a deal on how we work through this. And I mean, my personal preference would be say, look, we want out of the country, and what we want you to do is, and we talked about this earlier, and some people say, well, and I think you mentioned this earlier, would the government let you leave? Well, I'm hoping that if we do vote on independence in Alberta, we'll do it while Donald Trump or J.D. Vance are in power, and we'll send a delegation to Washington, just like Jeff Rath, and the night before we vote, we'll have Donald Trump tweet, hey, Mr. Carney, if you're there, I understand Alberta's voting on independence tomorrow, and then in capital letters he'll put, don't make me come up there. And I mean, quite frankly, that's the message we need from America is don't make us come up there. You guys sort this out like adults. You've got a process by doing it. You can vote on it. If 50% plus one want it, that's what we can do. Yeah. And then we'll recognize it too. I think it was you or somebody, maybe it was Michael was saying in some of those, in Caledonia they voted, but then the Spanish government didn't recognize it.
Yeah.
But in the good news, the one good thing I'll say that Quebec did for us is they forced the federal government to actually clarify the process by which you could leave the country. And as you noticed, they didn't say what a clear question was or what the percentage had to be. And the reason there's a real good reason why they didn't do that, because there's two sets of rules. If it's Quebec's leaving, it can be a 3-minute question, and you need 50% plus 0.01 is enough to leave. But if Alberta's leaving, it'll be a real clear question. We're leaving, yes or no. And but some of them will say, "Oh, you need 66% to leave." Well, if they didn't need 66% to leave, why do we need 60% to leave? See what I mean? So the reason they didn't clarify it was because there's two sets of rules, but they didn't want to tell us because it would bug us.
Sure, and we've got to remember that we've just spent the last 5 years watching buses being driven through our understanding of the effectiveness of the rules.
Yes.
So, I mean, you're right.
Yeah.
But first of all, the rules don't seem to matter. And second of all, we've got to look at this again from a post-nationalist agenda. So if there's a post-nationalist agenda to harvest Canada into a global system, the last thing they're going to do is allow Alberta to become the kind of the pain in the ass in the middle of the country that it has some kind of connection to Trump. They're not going to do it. So I mean, that's why I raised the question about what Premier Smith has said in relation to the appetite about the 51st state. That's a signaling that there's not going to be that's not going to be an undertaking that's going to be advanced from the provincial government in any official way. Which means that if there is a referendum, it's going to have to be done as a straw poll from the people that actually, whether it's accepted or not. And this is where we're talking about the Spanish example. And then it's going to be a case of, I think, looking to a declaration of self-determination. And that's ultimately where I think that this is going to go if there can't be some kind of political maneuvering done within the province and as a part of this nation to create the beachhead of freedom that we want to see, that Helm's Deep that I refer to, the anchor point in Canada. And when there's a declaration of self-determination as a people, then we're looking to the UK to say, hey, let's go back to 1931 and recognize that that's what Westminster actually passed in relation to what Canada is supposed to be. We'd like you to recognize this country, and let's go to the Americans who recognize that any constitutional republic they're going to align with and basically take a statement and say we validate you as a nation. And I ultimately think that that's where we're going, and I'm hoping that through if we have another election that we can create the moral legitimacy in Alberta by running from my perspective, running MPs in every constituency in Alberta that will be bearing this agenda to see the people of Canada set free, starting in Alberta. And this is the conversation.
When you say 1931, I hadn't heard this date until about a week ago.
Yep.
December 11th, 1931.
Right.
What you Ben, you talked a bunch of history. A bunch of history. Sorry.
Yeah.
And then this date is being shared around underground right now in a lot of conversations. And I would say, for one, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. When you say this is what Westminster meant, can you just expand? Can we just expand that for a second and explain what the heck you're talking about?
Well, I mean, for me, I suppose it was a personal journey a little bit, because whenever COVID happened, I started to look at why isn't our country working the way that it should. I saw the social contract that we've all grown up with as Canadians being broken. And I started to do some constitutional research. I started to explore some of them were rabbit trails and were, I don't think, significant. And then I came across this 1931 legislation, which was essentially the British government passing a bill called the Westminster Act 1931 that essentially stated that the sovereignty of Canada was being released from the British Crown and transferred to Canadians to be housed within provincial legislatures. And so there was a movement of that to the provincial legislatures that were in existence in 1931. And many of our provincial legislatures were at that time. And so the question then for us, and I think this is where this is why this detailed preamble that we've had in terms of Quebec's establishment vis-a-vis Upper and Lower in Canada is so important, because I think what had happened when that occurred. If you think about where Western Canada was, I mean, my family were still pioneering in Saskatchewan, setting up the farm and pulling up tree stumps, right?
Yep.
So they weren't reading bills from London that were sliding into Ottawa.
They were trying to stay alive.
They were thinking about food and how cold it was, right? So this bill came out, and basically it was the releasing of Canada from the British Empire to Canadians, and if I read my history deeper, which I did do, I think that was the intention of Queen Victoria before that, before her death in 1901. And so there was this general trajectory to see Canada become its own country. Yes, it came into existence in the squeeze between the American kind of imperialism, if you will, after the Revolution, and also the ends of the British Empire, and Canada was allowed to kind of birth and form. But her and the British agenda was to actually see us released to be a sovereign people. And something happened in 1931 where Ontario and Quebec simply said, hey, here's a franchise that we can simply appropriate and step into, and we'll perpetuate the picture of the crown here. And we're going to set up the electoral system, so we always basically have the centrality of power, and that's why we have a balanced electoral system right now. And we're going to create. We're a colony, but we're not anymore. So let's make Western Canada and everywhere else colonies of our colony, and that's why we have these equalization payments. And I think if you go back further into 1960 or 62, we're nearly $1 trillion since the early 60s. I'll stand correct on the exact number.
Wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
So that is really the discussion, because if anybody pulls the Westminster Act, it's still on Hansard, and you can still find it very easily. It's very, very clear about what was supposed to happen in that transition. So, and just one last comment. So, we can go into all kinds of constitutional debates in this country, going right back to the BNA Act, to 1867 Constitution, to 1982. I mean, the 1867 Constitution was letters patent. It wasn't actually a constitution. It just was a guiding principle for how the country was to function that was brought into the 1982 agreement. But the reality is, for where we're at right now, if you move to a declaration of self-determination, all of that falls away. It's like a fuel tank on a jet that's used. You just dump it, and this is really kind of where the conversation is. So we want to create a peaceful pathway to have this conversation starting in Alberta, and I think this is why this conversation is so powerful. But we've got to understand our history, and I think that's why part of this Quebec discussion is relevant for us in Alberta, because we weren't formed in the West really as a nation then. We're very vulnerable as a nation. The railway was built to make sure that British Columbia didn't become America at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what secured British Columbia and consolidated Canada. But we have to now look at our context now and say, we now have a system that we'll say politely is broken. I'm going to say it's also a little bit of a racketeering mechanism, because we're paying for an electoral system that is actually holding us hostage. And now it's actually hosting an ideology that is breaking the culture, values, and traditions that we want to see embedded in our families for the future. And now it's actually a duty to engage these issues, and these aren't normal political conversations. This is about the continuance and perpetuation of our people and our way of life. And this is as serious a conversation as we can ever have in our country, and we need to figure this out. And so I'm actually frankly grateful for President Trump, despite what everyone may think about him, because he's forcing this conversation into the Canadian lap, and we're going to have to decide what we're going to do. And my grandfathers would be ashamed of what we've allowed to happen in this nation in terms of the breakdown of the rule of law.
Well,
Can I just before you hop in, Ben? I'm just wondering. You go back to the Westminster, right?
Yeah.
Giving it to the people, and in housing it in the provincial parliaments, correct?
Yeah.
In theory, Could a premier just say, we actually don't need a referendum, we don't need to ask permission, we already have it in law, and we just got to go back to this date? Is that at all a coherent thought, or you're like, you're asking for a lot of troubles if you try and approach it that way?
Well, I mean, constitutionally, until 1982, you could have done that. Because what happened, the Statute of Westminster was not only for Canada, it was for the entire Commonwealth.
Okay.
And the first one that grabbed it in New Zealand. New Zealand grabbed it and said, okay, kick out the king and we're taking our stuff. And basically, what London was doing is that the Constitution was held in the UK Parliament. And they were releasing the document, the Constitution itself, of every of their colonies to the colony themselves. And that was an opportunity to renegotiate, reopen, change stuff as the document was transferred from London to every colony's country. And Canada didn't do it until 1982. So they stayed, they left the Constitution, the paperwork in London from 1931 to 1982. And this is what Trudeau did in 1982. He patriated that document, reopened it, and then changed rules, put it in a lock, and threw the key at the sea. The way the rules were changed, the Canadian Constitution is locked down. You cannot change it. We're done.
He embedded the imbalance.
Yeah, exactly.
Of the gig, if you will, into the Constitution and made it impossible to change.
With the participation of Brian Peckford, by the way, he was the orchestrator of locking down the Constitution, that it would never be able to be open again.
I feel like okay.
No, your questions. I think that question is: did Quebec ever sign the Constitution?
Did Quebec ever sign it?
Never.
So then, is it a binding agreement?
Well,
if not everybody signed on to it. How can we say they locked away the key when not everybody signed it?
It's because the patriation has been done. So legally, it went from London to Ottawa, and it's done. There was that chance to negotiate something, and when they negotiated, so they embedded in it that to change the Constitution, you need 7 provinces representing at least 51% of the population.
I understand what it says.
But the problem is that in terms of representation, because in 1867, it was a peace treaty between the Lower and Upper Canada. They brought in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia as mediator. And then PEI joined 2 years later as mediators for the big two guys. No, they were there to balance stuff. But when these Atlantic provinces joined, they joined with very special condition. I mean, PEI has still like something like 3 senators. There are 150,000 people. If we would have the same representation at PEI in Alberta, I think we would have something like 137 MPs and 16 senators to represent the population. And what Peckford made sure. It's called the Night of the Long Knife. He went in the kitchen with Jean Chrétien and negotiate his position for the Atlantic on behalf of the Atlantic province, and lock down the conditions to reopen the Constitution, would make it not openable, because not a single Atlantic province, they're on the gravy train. You know what? We always speak about the equalization payment to Quebec. When you look per capita, Newfoundland is the big winner. Like per capita, Newfoundland has received more money than any other Canadian. Okay, so yeah.
But is the agreement? Forgive me. This is why I got a lawyer in here, because maybe a lawyer can be like, no, it doesn't matter. If one of the provinces did not sign the document,
25% population,
right?
Yeah.
Doesn't that make it null and void, or is that not the case?
Well, I that's an anomaly to me that. I don't know the answer to that, because there's got to be some explanation. The bigger question for me, though, from that perspective is, was that negotiation done in the context of understanding of the 1931 arrangement that, first of all, gave the authority to the provincial legislatures? Or was it Pierre Elliott Trudeau strong-arming the provinces? Yes. And that was the thing. So I'm guessing that a lot of that negotiation happened, and they weren't actually conscious of the fact that they had the authority to form the federal government, rather than the federal government forcing them into a shoebox.
But the thing with the patriation is that they had, according to the new constitution, their own right, because there were more than 7 provinces at 51% population.
There's two things about that. No, that's good. But there's two things about this. Like you said, I don't think we've got time to list all the places where the federal government has violated all the rules. Like you said, they're driving a bus through the rules. This is like your wife saying, I'm leaving. You say, well, just a minute, I want to read the prenuptial. You say, well, read it if you want, but we're leaving.
Out the door.
Well, I'm going out the door, and you'll be talking to my lawyer. I mean, that's the way I feel about this. They can't break like 41 laws and then say, oh, you have to live by that law, even though we didn't live by the first 40. Like, give me a break. Like, we're tired of, what is it, rules for thee but not for me, or
but
rules
that's the farce that we're in.
That's
right
the
now.
farce of this country. Yeah, it's a basically our leader Paul Heyman calls it like an abusive relationship. They say, look, well, you can't just have it your way on everything. And so, like, to me, like, I mean, again, I don't think there's anybody that isn't prepared to have an adult conversation about it. But let's be honest. Like, let's not have rules for thee and not for me, or rules for me and not for thee. Whatever. Let's have a reasonable discussion about this. And Donald Trump is forcing to have this discussion, because he said, I don't want a bunch of retards living on the north side of our border. Like, I mean, I want to get, you guys need to sit down like adults, figure out what you're going to do. And I mean, if we do want to be the 51st state, like I say, there is a process. And if we want to live, if we want to sort of try and strive to live by the rule of law, the rule of law says a province can vote to leave the country.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, so even the people who want to have a 51st state, even if Donald Trump wants to have a 51st state, I think he would agree that we have a legal process by which we're bound to live, and say, okay, fine, give us time. We're going to have a referendum on independence, you know what I mean? And then, then we'll see how that works, and then we'll talk to you. We'll see if we can negotiate a deal where we're just good trading partners the way we've been for the last 30 or 40 years. If that's not working and there's something you're not happy with, well, then maybe you can press us a little harder to be the 51st state. So I think there's a process here, but I think we should all be pretty careful to stick to the rules as best we can, because if you get to where, like, everybody just says, well, they're not living by the rules, I'm not living by the rules, like, we're heading for chaos, aren't we?
Yeah, well, these rules are rules that are above the dysfunction of our existing domestic laws.
Yes.
I mean, that's why I'm talking about self-determination.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that is something that's recognized in international law. And
absolutely.
I think that's where this ultimately has to go. And I think we're gonna work to be polite Canadians, but I don't think that anybody actually wants to live in a kingdom called post-national carnivorous carny, because it's not going to be anything that we're going to like, and I think that there'll be very, very difficult confrontations if that happens. And I think more than that, I think what Trump is saying is that he's not going to allow that, because he's not going to host that in the same way that this is going to be an interesting comment. He is not going to host a post-nation state above his northern border in the same way that Russia was not going to allow the Ukraine to become NATO and or the EU. And if we don't sort this out, and given some of the geopolitical powers that are at play here in terms of our north, and in terms of what the Americans perceive to be embedded or hosted in Canada right now in the form of Chinese troops, we're one of the realities that I think Canadians need to actually face as at least let's call it a far-reaching probability right now, is that we could have a kinetic confrontation on our soil if we don't actually deal with these issues. And so when you're right in terms of one of the date lines that we need to work to in this conversation is about the end of the Trump administration, and perhaps J.D. Vance will continue with that mandate. But there is a quickening pace towards Canada being taken towards post-nationalism, and we're going to have this confrontation or this discussion, if you will, in terms of self-determination or a referendum or whatever form it's going to take from within the Canadian context sooner. And then, so whether Carney calls an election now when he's kind of coronated, will tell us very quickly what his intentions are in terms of a long or a short game. In my view, if he doesn't call an election, he's going to invoke emergency powers because Trump's so bad.
Yeah.
And we won't even be anywhere near an election until September of 2026.
Yeah.
And I would say that is a signal that we're moving quickly to a post-national reality. And this conversation is going to be more relevant than we know.
I agree. And I mean, Alberta, Alberta has, I think, a unique opportunity to be, like, if you want to call it the adult in the room, and say, like, we're not tolerating this. And one of the things that bothered me when the Trans Mountain Pipeline difficulties were going on, and is 70%. Remember how the protesters were on the pipeline all the time and everything, and we didn't do anything about it. It stalled things for months and months and months. But 70% of the freight that gets unloaded in Vancouver goes by rail to east of Alberta. So, like, if you want to bring Vancouver to a stop, you know what I mean, what you have to do is block stop the train at getting here. And I mean, Alberta, to its credit, I think is the only rat-free jurisdiction in the free world. If nothing else, you could stop them while you checked every boxcar for rats. You know what I mean? Which, you know, but nevertheless, you could stop it. And and I suggested this to some of, like, anyone who would listen to me, which is like 2 people, and they never passed it on. You know what I mean? But nevertheless, like I said, Jason Kenney should have said, look, like, if anybody steps on that pipeline right away again, we're going to stop the trains and we're going to turn off the gas that is coming out there. So you're going to be in a lot of trouble in a hurry. So do me a favor, just make sure it doesn't happen. If he'd have just called the Premier of BC and said, if this happens, this is what we're going to do, like, they would have brought in the army to let them keep building the thing. So some of the problems we have been from a lack of leadership in Alberta. Yes. And some of this stuff that they're talking about doing, you know, the different things that they're talking about doing, they're talking about using our energy sector against us as a retaliation in the tariff wars and one thing and another. Well, to me, Danielle Smith, instead of saying I'm joining Team Canada, so what she needs to do is say, well, I've talked to the Rat Patrol, and if you guys mention that again, we're going to start stopping the trains at the Alberta border for a week or 2 at a time, and you can see how you do in Eastern Canada with all this. And the other thing that like, to me, that I think we have to realize is, like, Alberta has, like, I mean, we have a lot of things that we sell to the Americans. One of them is oil, of course. And I mean, Trump is talking about drill, baby, drill. And to me, but the people I've listened to, which is basically just podcasts, he said even if he drilled, baby, drilled, it would be somewhere between 5 and 10 years before he could replace Alberta's oil. Yeah. So even if that's happening, we've got 10 years to deal with that. But years ago, a friend of mine was a pharmacist in Vegreville, and he had a pharmacy there. And one day, this nice-looking fella came in and said, "Oh, hi, I'm from Shoppers Drug Mart." I think it was Shoppers Drug Mart. We'd like to have a pharmacy in Vegreville, and we've got 2 choices. We could either buy yours, or we could build one across the street and sell below your cost until you're gone. So to his credit, he said, how much would you pay me? And they offered him a really nice price, and he sold it. But when you look at our beef industry, it's pretty hard. Like, I think my understanding is some of those packing plants in the Northwest, they run 2 or 3 days a week on Alberta beef. So like the oil industry, the beef industry, there's so many things that we're so tightly tied with us. It would be a real inconvenience for that. And you couldn't move, I don't think you could move our feeding industry to Pasco, Washington, or certainly our cow-calf industry to the States in less than 10 years. But if you look at Frank Stronach and his Magna car parts manufacturing, and I mean, if Donald Trump went to him and said the same thing, we're sort of thinking of doing this in America, but we've got good news. If you'd like to move your plants, we'll pay the freight to move them, and we'll give you a tax break. But if you don't want to do that, we're going to have warp speed Magna parts, and we'll be making our own in about 60 days. So you get to pick, like, do you want to move or don't? So I look at this Team Canada talking about we're going to go toe-to-toe with these people and say, like, it's like me going toe-to-toe with Muhammad Ali. You say, well, like, how long would that last? Yeah. You know what I mean? And so, like, I think, like, Alberta, and I was really disappointed in Danielle. Like I said, she's a dear friend of ours. But, I mean, I thought it was brilliant when she went to Mar-a-Lago. They said when she went to Mar-a-Lago, she stayed there overnight. When Trudeau went there, he had to stay at Motel 6. Like, you know what I mean? But anyway, like, it serves him right, yeah. But to me, I don't know where this last turn came from. I mean, hopefully, like, some of her friends will say, look, let's get back on track here. Like, let's work with them. You know what I mean? But I think Ontario has a lot more to lose with a fight with Trump than we do, because he sort of needs. And I think today I think he backed off the tariffs on us for another month, didn't he, or did he, or maybe not on the beef?
Mexico.
Okay, yeah.
But are we still only at 10%? Because he went 10%.
It was 10% on the oil, I think. But but I think. Let's keep calm, and let's be sure we're not the ones ratcheting this up. I mean, I think we have way more to lose than they do. Yes.
Well, I think the Liberals want to ratchet it up.
They do. They want to make it into an election
You've got
issue.
Chrystia Freeland talking about going to the UK and France to have them help us have a nuclear covering from the UK and France for Canada to protect us. You can imagine what the Americans will think of that, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So we've had we have an integrated brotherly relationship, and that's why the continued absence of a conversation about these issues that Trump's actually talking about is to our detriment every single day. It's like the clock ticking on that is getting louder and louder.
I know.
Yeah.
So we can talk about tariffs. It's like wrestling with an 80,000-pound gorilla. There's no point. That's not a good outcome in any event, and we'll run out of steam way faster. So, again, why? I would think if I were premier of this province, I'd be saying, look, we need to resolve anything to do with organized crime, moving anything that's illegal through this province. East, west, and north, south, and provide the assurances and accountability with those assurances to the Americans that that's the case, because we want to do that because that's the right thing to do. The fact that it benefits, right?
Yes,
we want, and that's really the bigger problem here in this big conversation, is because we're talking about the economic realities, but the root issue here, that's the cause. The root issue is, we have messed up values in this country because we're not actually hearing our leaders saying, why the hell wouldn't we want to sort out organized crime that's moving this disgusting drug and creating, a death culture in North America? But do you hear anybody saying that? And that's an economic money laundering machine. I mean, TD Bank, in November last year, just got a $4 billion fine associated with money laundering. And I tweeted and I said, I wonder if they'll ever disclose what the money laundering was for.
Yeah.
No. But this is our challenge, and why aren't we having these conversations?
But at the same time, for Alberta, I'm very worried. I've been working for the past 2 or 3 years full time to render the province more self-sustained through a lobby effort I'm doing on energy and all the rest. I mean, we have the top 5 oil producers of the province are 44% owned by the Chinese Communist Party. Like we don't own our oil. Our beef, 87% of all our beef are slaughtered by JBL and Cargill, American, Brazilian. So we don't control our beef. We don't control anything of our stuff. And then when we have the opportunity to demonstrate real sovereignty, we decide to do like window dressing with the Sovereignty Act. Meanwhile, you're not moving the provincial police, you're not moving on the Alberta pension plan, you're not moving taking control of collecting your own money, you're not moving on anything of that. So and then you come and you come with a budget with 5.6 billion deficit. And bring tax cuts
and oil prices going down or trending down.
It's like I do not understand. Like it doesn't make sense.
And now with the admonition that Canada needs to spend more money on its military to protect us. The question is, to protect us from who? Because, the threats have been there all along, and there hasn't been a discussion about it. In fact, the Canadian military has been defanged.
Yeah.
And if I know anything about what's going on out in the country, I've been going back and forth across this country now for 2 years. There's a lot of Canadians all across this country that feel the exact same way that we do. It's not just Alberta. And I think we need to remember that. But one of the things that I've seen across this country is that most of our real Canadian military is not in the Canadian uniform anymore. And they're basically watching what's going on here very carefully and are aware.
Audience members, I have military guys on here quite regularly.
Yeah.
And one of them, shout out to Chuck Prodnick, right? He's served in 4 tours overseas. Is one of those Canadian members who's seen real duty and, has been some harrowing and then some situations. And he was just on, because, him and Jamie Sinclair quite regular on here, and they've been very pro-Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time he was on is the first time he almost cried sitting where Danny's sitting. I was like, this is a grown man who has bled and lost friends for his country, and he's saying he's Alberta first.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking about a lot of the different things he's seeing the trend. He's like, this isn't good. Like, these things aren't good. And that's what the real military, as you're so eloquently pointing out, is saying. These are not good here. This is not good.
Well, I do take, sorry, Ben, I do take some comfort, and I'm encouraged from the conversations with many of those people, because they feel deeply the loyalty to the Canadian people. And I think I'd like to think when people talk about Alberta first, it's because they see that Alberta is that Helm's Deep for Canada, and it's the place that we can actually ratify this and get at least Western Canada back on track. But when I talk to a lot of those military people, they are very aware. They carry their obligation to the Canadian people, even though they're outside of the uniform. Yeah. And I know that I would think that as they're watching this, and they are aware, they are doing the strategic risk analysis in terms of the issues that I alluded to earlier, and they have very little time coming to the conclusion of understanding what the Americans are processing through when they're looking at the inherent risk in Canada that we are hosting. And I'm pretty sure that they're watching, let's say, the grass moving and the tea leaves, if you will, around this conversation very carefully, and would be prepared to stand too in the event that there was a real problem in this country, and they would defend the Canadian people. And I have a confidence in that. And I think what we need to do in this country is show the moral leadership that we need to do to actually talk about the values in terms of how do we see our culture, values, and traditions as a people endure. And this is why I'm here today to have this conversation, because unless we actually speak the truth about what's going on in the country, I don't think there's any conversations like this going on in the country. Maybe they are, but I haven't heard them yet. But we need to have these conversations so people actually really understand what the stakes are, and then they can assess how long they're going to play with the notion that perhaps Premier Smith's saying, well, there's not really an appetite for a 51st state. I don't want to be American, but I sure believe that we need to reforge this country for the Canada that we want, because the existing one and all the latent issues that's come along with it for the last 400 years, as Ben's just alluded to, that body needs to die, and we need to reforge this. We need to rebirth this country, and it starts here. So when I hear Alberta First, I hear this is the place to start the furnace to actually see this country restored to what we want it to be, because we're being hijacked by a fifth column in this country. That's what's happening. We need to understand what that means.
Yeah.
That's you can hear the knocking.
Yes,
the knock. That's the knock. It's funny. I'm like,
that's Mark Carney. He wants to come and talk to us.
I just was about to say my son is in the military, and his girlfriend as well. They're both in the Navy. They're based in the Esquimalt. My son is a sonar operator on the Corner Brook. So we have 4 subs in Canada, 2 that are parked and being salvaged, and 2 that are working sometimes. One in Halifax and one in Victoria. And the Corner Brook is in Victoria, and my son is part of the main crew, and he's a sonar up on that. And sometimes, like I cannot believe, I was telling you that often I pray way more that he would not be lost at sea than lost at battle, and he was last week they are gone for a 6-month mission right now, which cannot tell us what it is, of course. But he was telling me that now they were going like only 3 weeks coming back because the batteries are not very good on it. They're changing the battery. They're going another. Like it's ridiculous. Like what are we doing? Like it's
like West Edmonton Mall has better submarines than our Canadian Navy. It's but what a mess! I know.
It is a mess.
But see, like I think what Donald Trump is doing.
West Edmonton Mall doesn't have the subs anymore.
Oh,
they sold them to the Canadian military.
Yeah, okay. You can tell when the last time I went to West Edmonton Mall, but in any event, like I think what Donald Trump is, I think
you live under 50 miles from here.
Yeah, that's right. It's straight west of here. I think I told you that. Yeah, but see, like I think what Donald Trump is saying, like kids, get your act together. Like literally, like don't make me come up there. Like I mean, because and he's doing us a favor to say that too, because somebody's coming here. You know what I mean? And when you talk about all the infiltration into the Liberal government and where they come from, and an army of people here of military-age men that have just been coming into our country unvetted, like the enemy is among us, like it truly is. And I mean, we need to be.
Yeah, and let's
aware.
recognize
Let's
that
recognize
there was
it,
a
yes.
piece of legislation signed by Stephen Harper called the Foreign Interference Protection Act that allowed foreign troops in to this country to protect their investment interests.
Yes.
So that was the gateway, and we need to cite that and let people understand that there was actually a gateway port of entry to provide the grounds to enter and host. But the problem is that no one's talking about it except the Americans, which are actually really quite concerned about it because they see it as a potential continental destabilization. So we better.
They've got 20 or 30,000 military-age Chinese people in America too, and as you know, like nobody gets out of China without the government knowing it. So the government knows they're here, and I mean, who knows who knows what their order will be when they get it, and like. One of my dear friends was his dad was a German soldier, and he got conscripted into the German army in the Second World War at 14 years old. But they would say, they would go to some young soldier and say, go to the Trudeau farm and kill them all and be back here by dark. And if you're not here by dark, we'll go and get your family. And when you do get here, we'll shoot them in front of you, and then we will shoot you. So be sure you're back by dark.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so when you see all these young military men from different countries, but China in particular, they all have family back in China that they're hoping to get here. And you can be sure the order is the same. Say, well, do this if you ever want to see your mother again, if you ever want to see your sister again. So we're in really, like, this is not the Liberals against the PCs. This is good versus evil, and we need to be very, very aware.
And I
of
think
what we're
everybody
talking
understands too when it comes to the Canadian military. What was it? 10 days ago, maybe they had the press conference where they're talking about the requirements to get in our military lowered, permanent residence. I'm married to a permanent resident. Right? Lovely woman from Minnesota.
Yeah.
So there are going to be some permanent residents in there that are going to serve our military and be wonderful.
Yeah.
Sure. But I mean, we're lowering the standard to what we give guns to.
I know.
And train to be lethal.
And at the same time that they amended the entry requirements to the Canadian Armed Forces, they also passed a law to enable the Canadian Armed Forces to supplement police enforcement in this country.
Yeah, so it gives them the right. Yeah.
So that's the second part of that punch. So Canadians could quickly, and in the event that there were a disagreement like the convoy, could be dealing with foreigners inside of a Canadian uniform enforcing the law with the Canadian police alongside the Canadian police.
And the way my brain goes, because here in Lloydminster we've actually not seen that part of it, but go to Ottawa and you're there for the convoy. And the first day, and I've told this story lots, the first day they got their balaclavas on, the police, they got their arms crossed, and they're very confrontational. And it took, I think, 4 days. And by that time, they're high-fiving, protest. They just realized, whoa, this isn't the bill of goods that we've been sold.
Yeah.
And then what do? They changed out the police officers and it started all over again.
Yeah.
When it was the protest here, the carbon tax protest on the east side of Lloyd, there was, I don't know, was there 300 people there?
Maybe.
And they showed up with, I don't know, was it 30 cops? Was it 50? I'm splitting hairs. And they were from anywhere but here. And you're like, they already have this tactic. And by lowering the requirements and adding on all these different ethnicities and on and on and on into the military, we're going to have that force in the next year or 10 that's going to be able to be enacted on our population, and they're not going to care.
Yeah, plus these taxes have been in 1999, I believe, 2000. In Quebec, I was running for my brother, and we were minority partner, but anyway, the largest event production company in Quebec. And we had a mandate. We installed 2 big screens in Quebec City during the World Commerce Organization meeting. And there was a lot of protest there. And we had our production trailer, to shoot what was happening in the wall, because Quebec they closed the wall basically for the meeting. And of old Quebec, and we were in that production trailer, and we had the Sûreté du Québec, the provincial police there, and they were looking at, we had camera looking at the crowd, and they were spotting guys that they knew, and then we had guys that we could send to make trouble, basically. So we're paying, I don't know at the time, 5-6 guys $1,000 a day, and the deal is that if you end up in jail, we keep on paying you $1,000 a day, and we're so when the crowd was getting a bit too excited, would send these guys. They would then create havoc, and then the police will come with their sticks and their big shield and their horses and throw everybody out. So, but it was the police that was calling the shot to do that.
I don't know if we solved anything today.
Well, let me ask you this, Ben. How much do you think a private referendum would cost?
Well,
because I don't think there's going to be a governmental one.
What do you mean by a private referendum?
I mean,
first?
where Canadians actually come and say, you know what, we are running a straw poll ourselves. We'll have an auditor, accounting firm to verify the signatures. You could use a blockchain voting mechanism to do that, and you actually took a straw poll across Western Canada, isolated Alberta, and open it up for 10 days for a vote in terms of actually defined questions. One of them would be,
do you want to separate or leave? Or
I mean, it's not going to be a 3-minute read for that conversation, because one of the implicit questions that's going on here in terms of this discussion about a referendum is, does it need to be sponsored by the government? And I don't think it's going to be forthcoming by certainly the federal government, and I don't think now, from what I heard yesterday from the Premier's office, that it's going to be initiated here in Alberta. So there is a certain moral legitimacy to a properly run canvassing of the province of Alberta to actually contribute to clarifying the people's position on this. And that's why I'm asking, how expensive would that be? And that's kind of the framework that would start to support a discussion about actually saying, actually the people simply do want to be free, because we don't want to live under tyranny, and we don't want to live under a mechanism that actually is making friends with tyrants for whatever reason. And one of the questions that I want to ask, it's probably a slightly controversial question, is, is there an analogousness? Is there a comparison here to be made with the changes that we saw with Jason Kenney during COVID in relation to what we've seen with Premier Smith in relation to this position in the last 48 hours? I mean, well, it's a question.
Yeah. Well, and this is where Jeff Rath and what he's doing with APP. Right? That's because we have a very special law here in Alberta that allow us to trigger the population a referendum. The conditions are very stringent to trigger that, but like that law doesn't exist in Quebec. In Quebec, only the government can trigger it.
But who can trigger it?
The population. So you need I don't know what the number is.
That's the problem though. The trigger is 600,000 signatures.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Well, I thought it was 300,000.
I don't think so.
I thought it was 300,000 or 325 roughly in 90 days.
Okay.
That's the number that I've been
even
told.
So that's a
it's a
big
monument.
number.
It's a monumental
like
task.
400,000 people can change the government. You know what I mean? So if you're gonna, Jason Kenney, to his credit, traveled the province in his blue half-ton. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when he was done, he said, "Oh, the people want." They want recall legislation.
Yeah.
So he brought in recall legislation, and our Wild Rose recall legislation is 50% plus one of the people who voted in the last election. So if you're in a riding that has 15,000 votes, 7,500 people can trigger a recall of your elected official. Or in Mayor Gondek's case, I think it was it 200? It was 287,000 people. Like they needed. Like there was 1 million people there, so they needed 500,000 signatures or something to trigger a recall under Jason Kenney's rules.
Yeah.
But under our recall, where it was 50% plus one of the number of people who voted, I think it was 137,000 they needed. Well, they only got to 87,000, but if you only had to get to 137, you could have went to everybody and said, look, if everybody can find one more person, we can get there. But see, can I just finish this thought before I lose it? See, I saw Tucker Carlson interviewing Donald Trump, and he said, whatever happened, to Bill Barr. He said he was had such impressive credentials. And Donald said he was so afraid of being impeached, which is their version of recall, that he was afraid to go out of his office. You know what I mean? And see, my friend says you don't have to hang everybody, you just have to hang somebody, and everybody pays attention. And see, one of the things that we find, and the reason our system doesn't work, like all these MLAs, they get elected. We have one, I love him, he's a dear friend of mine, you know what I mean? I'm going there to talk about CO2 and how the world needs more CO2, and I'm going to do that. Well, anyway, we're 6 years in, and he's, everybody sort of knows that he wants to do something about CO2. But what happens, and I was at the meeting when he told Jason Kenney he wanted to do that. Oh, yeah, when you're in caucus, you're welcome to say whatever you want. But as soon as you're in caucus, you say, well, I want to talk about CO2. Well, you could, but if you talk about that, then we'll be off message, and then you'll be hurting the government because you're getting us away from our message, which is true, because Drew Barnes has mentioned CO2 a few times, and it ends up being about a 1 week news story. But if you actually have recall, well, then the guy, when the premier says, well, if you say that, we'll be off message, and then you won't be in caucus. Well, then the MLA can say, well, actually, if I don't say it, they're going to recall me, and then you'll be losing a by-election in my area. So it sort of gives the people, whether they have it or not, it gives them the backbone to go and do something about some of these things. But going back to the referendum, it's either even 300,000 signatures. But I can tell you, remember, was anybody involved in the oil respect petition? I think it was in 2000. Was it in 2014? Someone in Alberta started that oil respect. Remember, I tried to phone today. Remember Bernard Hancock, the roughneck? He was in Ottawa. Anyway, somebody started an oil respect campaign to respect Alberta oil. They were taking signatures in a petition. Bernard went with them. They delivered 35,000 signatures to Ottawa. You mean? And then they just came back home, and they said, "Well, we said, well, what do you do now?" Yeah. Well, we delivered the petition. What more? What do you want us to do? You know what I mean? My guess is they were shredding the petitions before Bernard Hancock got back to his oil rig. You know what I mean? And so, but to me, if we want to get people's attention, there's only one thing that actually gets elected people's attention. That's the thought that they might lose. Yeah. And so, to me, I've got 40 some thousand unread emails. It's at, what am I at today? Yeah, well, I'm up to 50,000 unread emails. So if I haven't got back to your email, I apologize. But in any event, but to me, if you want to get, the thing that really gets the government's attention is when somebody says, well, if they don't do it, we will do it. So here I'm going to make the pitch for our Wild Rose Party, because Oil Respect had 34,000 signatures, nobody ever heard anything about it. But I can tell you, if 34,000 people in Alberta bought a Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition membership, Danielle Smith wouldn't be talking about her friends in Eastern Canada anymore. She'd be talking about she'd be talking about what do we have to. She'd be talking to all our MLAs, saying, well, how many of those memberships got sold in your area? What do we have to do to get them back on side? So, there's some things we can do here, but just always saying, oh yeah, we love the UCP government, we hope they're going to fix it. Sometimes you need somebody to the right of them saying, we'll do this.
Well, I would argue that I don't know if I'm bang on this. You guys have all been staring at it too, but Pierre Poilievre, I can pick on him for a bit.
Yeah.
If he thinks it's in his best interest, he'll say it, which means he's monitoring public opinion. And when you said, how much would it cost to do a straw poll? To me, that's interesting, because I think Danielle obviously would be paying attention to that. And if all of a sudden, everybody, when I get in these political circles, one of the things I always, you go to a town hall and there's 25 people there, and you're like, oh, this is weird. Why is nobody here? And then you put on an event, the first one I ever did, and I had 270 people. I had political people coming up to me, how'd you do this? I'm like, I don't know. I talk about real things that people care about, and they want to hear this stuff.
And you have an honest conversation.
It's funny when you start talking about things and you lose the censorship muzzle of we can't talk about certain topics, because if we do that, people actually show up. Yeah. And so I look at the straw poll thing and I go, guys, we can sit here and talk about things 10 years from now. But if Carney gets in, this conversation goes supersonic, which means if you go back to 2019, when the guy with the Wexit group went from, whether the number's right or not, it went from one person to 100,000 overnight. the Facebook group,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And the reason why I know that wasn't all BS is because I showed up to Lloyd, where probably 200 to 300 people all showed up to listen to him talk.
Yep.
And we are staring down.
Peter Downing. Peter Downing, his name was. Yeah.
And then he said he was going to be the leader and lost everybody. That is my recollection of that, because I remember being like, this is interesting. I'm interested. This time could be coming in the next month. And you go, a straw poll. Danielle Smith can say whatever she wants. But if 200,000, 400,000, however many 100,000 it is, see what Carney's doing, and overnight start voicing that, she's proven and she's changed her thought. She ran in the debate with Ezra Levant and Dennis Modry, the APP event, and she sat there and said, I think when it comes to trans kids or that conversation, we should have a tiered approach. And I'm butchering how she said it, but the idea will be sound. K to 6 should never hear that. 7 to 9, you need, the introductory to sex ed. And in high school, we need to start talking about basically the trans stuff. Well, she just went against everything she said by talking about we're going to remove a whole bunch from school and we're going to come. Why is that? Because parents stood up in mass and said no more of this. And so we're coming to a time, or at least it feels like from my standpoint, where I think town halls are going to be overflowing if Carney gets in. Because people are going to be back to, well, what can we do about it? And a straw poll, I'm curious, is that even possible? Is there a way you raise whatever the number is? Is it $1 million? Is it 10 million? Where you could actually do a citizen-led poll to show that, listen, whether it's 50%, maybe it's only 26%, but right now they're trying to act like it's 2%.
Yeah, it is, and it can be done. It can be done with blockchain. It can be done in a way that is verified to ID in terms of Alberta identity or driver's license or whatever. And that's why I asked the question about the cost of it, because it starts to become the moral authority that supports the legitimacy to support a petition to say, basically, we wish to self-determine.
Brad, I think that's a really good idea. One of the things we do in the political polling, though, is you can get some of these polling companies. They'll phone 5,000 people. It only costs $500, but you can do a pretty random survey, and you could do that and say these 3 questions. Then say, would you be interested in donating some money to do a like a real abacus poll by blockchain or whatever? So you would like I would say for $2,000 you could probably poll somewhere around 4,000 to 10,000 people, and get a pretty good random idea. And let's just say it came in at, 50% were quite interested, 20% were sort of interested, 10% no. And then if one of the questions was, would you be prepared to make a donation to whatever you want to call the group to actually do this on a larger basis that would have would cost a lot of money, but it would give us what you said. It would give us the moral authority to say, look, we did a legitimate poll. These are voters. 40% of them voted that they want to have a referendum on independence. You know what I mean? But again, like you said, one of the things that Danielle has backed down on, before you have a referendum on independence, one of the first things you need is your own Alberta police force.
Yes.
Because you try and have a referendum on independence in Alberta with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, it'll be like High River. They'll be walking down the street, kicking in the doors of the people who are organizing the campaign. And so the first thing we need is our own police force, which, as you know, that was almost the first thing she backed down on. I guess she's sort of trying to bring that back a little bit with some sheriffs and one thing and another. Yeah. But again, she backed down on her own pension plan, which again, I think any rational person that has looked at the pension plan said we should have our own. You know what I mean?
That's right. So
why are we backing down on all of these things?
Yeah. So I mean, for me, I've done some preliminary research on what that would look like to do it.
You're talking about the polling thing?
Yeah. Yes, I know you're actually talking about a precursor that would be a primer. For the polling. Yes. So, I've done a little bit of research on that. I'm not a techie in terms of how do you run a blockchain to do this, but I think that one of the things in terms of just doing a polling, it doesn't, it's too small a sample to actually validate an argument for a legitimate proposition for self-determination. Yeah. So you'd actually want to get to a position where you polled. You actually ran a vote that people validated their ability to vote by their, Alberta driver's license, and
Yep.
it was audited.
Yep.
And it isn't subject to being dismissed because it's just a polling.
No,
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
To me, it's an interesting thought. I
Yeah.
don't, like when it comes to tech and all that, I laugh. I'm like, well, we got brilliant people in this province.
That's right.
The-
All right,
I'm sure that they could figure it out very quickly.
The main problem is always come down to money and how money is managed with political party and with the director of election. No, so if you want to do everything above board, good luck, because that well, I mean, the system is
But
not
we're
made
not
for
a
it.
political party.
So Ben,
But yes, but if you this is exactly what David Parker got found guilty of with
Yes.
TDA, is that he was involved in a political discussion. Sorry, and that automatically limits you to 135,000 maximum that can apply to a certain cause. So now what you have to do is actually create a constellation of
The Alberta Prosperity
small
the Alberta
organization.
Prosperity Project could do that though. Like, I mean, they could do this kind of a poll. See, the rules are a lot different in the 6 months. Rachel Notley brought in really stringent rules in the 6 months prior, and maybe even in the year prior to an election. Like, and you can't hardly say anything without, But I think the Alberta Prosperity Project or some of these groups, the Free Alberta Strategy, the Action, who's the one that Josh Andrus Project Confederation, some of those that are just, I mean, they could I think you could do it through them. They would have the right to do it. Say we're doing a reader survey. Candace Malcolm could do it through True North, or I guess is she with Keen Bexley now or something?
Yeah. Juno knows.
Juno
Are you
knows.
saying, like, I'm just, forgive me, this is where I'm like the new guy at the table. I'm like, so Shaun Newman goes, listen, I'm going to invest in this technology. It's going to cost me $1 million. I'm going to do whatever I got to do to make that happen.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to put it out to the Alberta population that you're saying I could be fined for doing that?
Oh yeah, if you intervene in the political realm.
But how am I interviewing? I'm trying to gauge my fellow citizens.
This is where you need very good lawyers.
But I think, Ben, that's the difference. I mean, David Parker was running that as a lobbyist group that became political. It's different, I think, for a business, right? Wouldn't it be?
Well, I mean, a private business that would. Yeah,
What David Parker got in trouble for was saying, like, call us, we'll pay your registration to go to the convention.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to do that. You know what I mean? But I mean, Abacus does polling every day. I mean, we could set up, Grant and Dan's polling company, and we could do it through our polling company. Or you could have a polling company. You could do it. But it's a matter of convincing people to raise the money. But as this thing grows, I think I like it gives you a lot of credibility, and if you could actually say, like,
legitimacy.
It gives you legitimacy. Yes, exactly. And I mean,
and maybe if someone were doing this cleverly, they might run it in the U.S. with an audited system.
Well, again, this is illegal. You cannot you cannot bring money from foreign money. It's the same as the Chinese. It would be considered foreign interference.
It wouldn't be foreign money. It wouldn't be foreign money, Ben, because it would be run in the U.S. And the data inputs would be IDs from Alberta that populated.
Yeah,
that
like
poll.
I mean, to get on X now, to become a paid, whatever it is, the blue check mark, you got to have your driver's license. Like, this isn't, everybody gets freaked out by it. Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
So you go like, oh, this can't happen. I'm like, the technology is all around us.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and under the wrong hands, it is absolutely going to suffocate us all.
Yeah.
And we'll have some form of social credit score where you can only go so far and blah 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 blah.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
But under this idea, it's like, would I willingly submit my driver's license to have a vote in a straw man poll that could signal to the government, hey, there's like 44% of people, and it was 1.2 million that voted in it? Because the if I've learned anything from anything, specifically politics, is you need the bar to be a part of this so low that anyone can just sit at home and do it. Take a scan, boom, I'm in, I vote. I'm Albertan, great, here it is.
So call Elon. He'd probably facilitate it on Twitter.
He might do it.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Like, and you mentioned like social credit scores. Like, if Carney gets in, we'll be looking at social credit scores.
Well, that's what I
We'll be
mean.
looking at-
We're looking down the barrel of a gun and acting like,
yeah.
well, we got to do this, we got to do
Yeah.
that. I'm like, I'm watching this. I got some choice words rolling in my head, and I'll keep it to myself. This guy has admitted he's a globalist. He's tied to the West. He's tied to everything we don't want.
Yeah.
And we're sitting here talking like, well, if you do it this way, they could come at. It's like, I don't know, are we in war or we aren't in war?
Well,
I look at the Liberal Party and what it stands for and what it's trying to do to our country.
Yeah.
And I go, I guess I've drawn a line in the sand. And I'm like, I can't have them come anymore into my life. I can't have them destroy this place that I call home. And at some point, the citizens either are going to wake up or they're not. And if they're not, that's fine. Maybe that's just signaling where people like us are eventually going to have to go. The other hand is like, well, if the bar to just get in and have your vote heard or have your opinion heard in Alberta is the cable on the floor. It's like, people can't see it. But literally, I can just walk over it. It's almost like, well, that was it? And I could do it from my home?
Yeah.
And we could have this poll? And you go, well, what would Daniel Smith do with it? Well, I tell you what all of media would do with it. They'd have to talk about it. If it's 5 people, they're not going to talk about it. If it's 50,000, they're going to talk about it. If it's 500,000, they're really going to talk about it because they're not going to be able to turn away from it. And the problem with a referendum, we've already talked about how many hundreds of thousands of signatures you need to get in a time frame, and then you got to give it to the government, and then they got to act like they're going to do something with it. And like I'm hard on the government, any politics, because everybody just lets me down over and over again.
How much money did we spend on our like Jason Kenney came up with that on the equalization, like the referendum on equalization?
Well,
72% of the, like we all, like he got elected on doing something about equalization, and then he didn't do anything. And when people started getting mad, by his own admission, he stayed up all night, writing his speech to say that he was creating the Fair Deal panel that we're going to travel around to see if we still wanted to do what we elected him to do. And you think, well, yeah, like we didn't change; it was you that changed. Like we elected you to do that. Now a year later, you're staying up all night.
We don't need a panel. We don't need 5 years to get this. The technology is sitting all around us.
So then we vote. Then we vote. 72% want to do something about it. So then he writes 3 sternly worded letters to Trudeau, and that's the end of it. Then we move on to something else. You think, like, it's disgraceful. Like Victor Davis Hanson on Fox News, he said, we are increasingly being governed by people who have never studied anything in their life except how to get elected. And what Jason did was pretty clever, getting elected. You promised to do this when the people started getting mad. You haven't done it. Well, you promised to do it again, and you actually start doing something that looks like you're going to do it. And then you have a vote. Then you write a letter, and then you just change the subject to something else and move on to something else. You know what I mean? But again, he never really did one thing as far as actually getting it changed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That referendum was a joke anyway.
Of course it was.
I mean, he applied it first. There's no campaign around it. He applied it during a municipal election, which is the less participation you can get. And then he put another question about the change of time. Like, you have, what? So you want me to, no, equalization and do we buy blue shirt? No, these are the 2 questions. Like, what? I mean.
But you guys, like, I know, Grant, I always say you've stared at politics longer, and you've pointed out to me in coffee before this. I haven't actually been in there that long, but I'm staring at 2 guys who've spent their life around politics. I don't know why this surprised you anymore. I've been staring at this now for 4 years. They're doing the same thing over and over again, and we expect a different outcome. They're telling us where they're leading us. And it's about time we just said, okay, well, the ability to disrupt the system is right here and elsewhere, and the technology to do something about it is there. The appetite for it, if Pierre gets elected in a month's time, 3 months' time, whatever, I think it dies down. Like I've said that lots. I think it just dampens down. If he doesn't, in the short term, if Carney stays in, he waits till October, he waits till 2026, he does anything in that. This only... The conversation only heats up more.
Flames,
and we can sit and just talk in circles.
Sure.
But like at the end of the day, we're like, well, it's going to cost money. It's like, okay, well, the Freedom Convoy, look at how much money it raised in a short period of time. Why? Because people were upset with what their government is doing to them. And I would say that sentiment is coming back, and it kind of shocks me. It shocks even me how I'm talking right now, because I'm like, I thought for sure I could see the path that was kind of being laid out, and the apple cart has just been thrown over. And I think more and more Canadians, specifically Albertans, are starting to see it. the blanket, as you pointed out, has been pulled off.
Yeah.
It's like, what is going on?
But this conversation in relation to even your hypothesis there about if Poilievre wins, I mean, Poilievre right now is contending for Ontario because all the red Tories and blue Liberals are shifting towards Carney, and what is he basically saying? He's pandering to Ontario and Quebec, as always happens, and we've watched all our lifetime. And he's telling Albertans that he's going to continue with the equalization payments. So, in other words, Albertans, you're going to pay.
Yeah.
You're going to pay for the continuation of this dysfunctional system. And so this is where Albertans really need to wake up and say, we really need to change our federal perspective. And I don't apologize for actually talking politics on this issue, because we actually need value propositions and start dealing with root issues in this country. And it needs to be in a way that displaces the tyranny that is destroying our nation. And right now, retaliatory tariffs and globalist thinking is what is destroying our nation. And I want the people of Canada to be free. I want my grandchildren to be free. And it starts here in Alberta. That's it.
I would love to
do that.
I would love to keep this going, but I one of the things I did not see coming today was the construction zone that is the just outside the studio. I can hear it starting to pick up again.
The truth is, he just got a text from his wife.
I did tell him too if I stay here too long. But I appreciate you guys coming in and doing this, because I think this is a discussion that isn't going away anytime soon. And I know for me to the listener, it's something that I'm going to be bringing on different Albertans to add to this discussion, because I think the answer lies there with us. We just have to start talking about it. And once we start talking about it, the conversation is going to naturally bubble. The pressure isn't going away from the federal government. It isn't going away from politics. And if we don't talk about it now, we're going to get caught flat-footed when it does happen. And then everybody's going to be going, well, what should we be doing? Well, we should have been talking about it. So that's what we're starting here today. And I'm going to end it there, because I know I can see everybody saying, give me one last word. But I can hear it in the background. Yeah. And I appreciate you guys coming in and doing this. And look forward to having you back on at some point to continue it on.
And it went surprisingly well with the Quebecer here.
Thanks, gentlemen.